But the Iranians have been, they create something called the axis of resistance. And, it stretches from Lebanon, where Hezbollah is, through Syria, into Iraq with the pro-Iranian militias, Iran, and then down into Yemen with the Houthi. And Iran, provides, and I guess Hamas is thrown into that now too. And Iran provides financial resources and in some cases direct military assistance. With Yemen, there's no doubt that Iran has been providing Yemen with the resources necessary to take on Saudi Arabia in a war by proxy, ballistic missiles, drone capabilities, etc. But the Houthi do what the Houthi want to do. It ain't like the Houthi say, oh, big brother Iran's got to tell us what to do. The Houthi woke up and said, screw it, baby, we're going to war. We're fighting in defense of the Palestinians. And Iran's going, no, don't. We're trying to manage this escalation here. We don't want you. But the Houthi are the wild boys of the Middle East, and they're just like, yeehaw, go. And they start firing missiles, they firing stuff. And now they've done something that really hurts, is because this, I guess it's a Strait of Babel or Manbel, I can't pronounce it, but the little narrow thing on the, where the Red Sea comes into the Gulf of Aden, there's a narrow little passageway where all the ships have to go through, and they're in the range of everything the Yemenis have. And the Yemenis have said, as long as Israel's doing what they're doing in Gaza, no shipping will be allowed to go through if it's heading to Israel. And they're sink. I don't think they think they've sunk stuff, but they've hit stuff, put it on fire, they've captured stuff. And so now what's happening is that, ships are very expensive, and the owners don't like their ships to catch on fire or be captured. And so they're diverting all the way around Africa, coming in the other way to get to Israel. And that's very, very expensive. It's costing Israel tens of billions of dollars of denied economic activity. And so the Houthi are actually very sophisticated here. This is a very sophisticated weapon that they've dealt the Israelis. And the United States is going, damn it, now we got to respond here. But if we respond there, we got to take those forces and move in here. And remember, we've already said we don't have any money for this. All those aircraft carriers that we deployed to scare Hezbollah, it's basically eating up the Navy's operational budget, meaning money that was supposed to be set aside for training and other things is now being spent on these operations, which means there's no training taking place. There's other things that aren't happening. And now you want to expand naval operations into this area. Where's the money coming from? This is why the U.S. Navy is calling up the Australians and saying, hey, get some of your ships up here right now. We need you to take care of the security. And the Australians are going, no, we're not going to do that. This is a problem for the United States because we don't have the force structure to do everything at once. And so the Houthi have dealt a huge blow, not only to Israel, but to the United States. And the only way that we could rectify this is to go to war against them. But the Saudis have been using American-provided aircraft and American intelligence since 2014, and they haven't beat the Houthi yet. And then again, who's going to pay for this? Where's the money coming from? We're going to have another war in Yemen, a forever war. And none of these wars have gone well for us. And if we go to war against the Houthi, the whole region's going to blow up. The axis of resistance will just go haywire. These militias that are firing against American forces in Iraq and in Syria, believe it or not, are holding back. They could do a lot more. They're simply reminding the Americans that they're here and that there will be price to be paid so long as this conflict goes on, that nothing is free. And what has the United States done? We've responded very minimally. We've bombed a couple warehouses associated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Command, but we've bombed those warehouses before in I guess Abu Kamal across the river from Al-Qaim. We've been hitting that place, the same place over and over again. It's like the Iranians go, okay, rebuild the warehouse so America can bomb it next week, kind of thing. We're not doing real harm on the Iranians because we don't want to. If we do real harm on the Iranians, then they get involved. And now we're talking about an expansive conflict, and we only got 2,000 guys in that region. That ain't a lot of guys. And if the whole region blows up, those 2,000 guys can be swamped. They can be overrun. And now we have to divert all our air power into that area. Again, who's going to pay for it? We don't have a budget for this. And now we're doing that. And this war gets out of control, spins out of control. This is a nightmare scenario for the Biden administration. And if it blows up enough, because another area that everybody's worried about is what's going to happen with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has done a masterful job of escalation management. They have been, I mean, it's like the Israelis, are sitting there in this boxing match with Hamas, and Hamas split the eye, and Israel's bleeding here, and Hezbollah is just sitting there once in a while going, "Let me rub some salt in that wound for you. And come on, get out of here." Boom, boom, pow, and they get salt in that wound. Stop it. Hezbollah is just sitting there pissing them off because they're really, really putting, and it's hurting them. Remember how sophisticated I said the Houthi were? Understand that most of what Hezbollah is doing against Israel is economic in nature. Yes, they're taking down Israeli troops. They're destroying a lot of Israeli tanks, a lot of Israeli infrastructure. But what they're really doing is terrorizing the north so much that 70,000 Israelis had to be withdrawn from the northern settlements and resettled in temporary accommodations. That ain't free. That ain't free. It's costing Israel billions of dollars. And that 70,000 who, they had jobs up there, which means they're working, they're producing, there's taxes, the economy kind of stuff. They're here now. They ain't working. They ain't producing. They're just sucking up resources. It's a huge, huge, giant, gutting of the Israeli economy. The same thing out of what Hamas is doing in the settlements in Negev. People tens of thousands had to be relocated. Man, this is a giant hole in the Israeli economy, and it's unsustainable. On top of that, 300,000 reservists. You know what a reservist is? It's a working man. It's a guy who has a job. He has a family. He is participating in the Israeli economic experience. And now he's not. Now he's in the reserves where he's getting a paycheck because they have to pay him, but he's not producing anything. That job is gapped. Whatever he was doing in the Israeli economy ain't happening right now. And billions of dollars. So what Hezbollah is doing, what the Houthi are doing, the economic impact on this is destroying the Israeli economy, destroying it. And this is unsustainable for Israel. So this alone is prompting the Israelis to say, we have to resolve this fight. You got people like Gallant. I think he's the Minister of Defense right now. What a character, with his genocidal talk. But he's talking about we're going to take it to them. Gallant knows, though, and so does the Israeli Defense Force, that if Israel were to open up a second front against Hezbollah, that Hezbollah will take Galilee, that northern Israel will fall. Because Hezbollah's got 80,000 guys. Many of them, most of them perhaps, are combat hardened. That means they've been fighting in that, the Syrian conflict. These guys know war. They're very well trained, very well equipped, very well motivated, and they have a plan. If you think the Hamas plan that was executed on October 7th was innovative, you haven't seen anything yet. Hezbollah has a plan to take northern Israel, and they will take northern Israel, and there's nothing Israel can do to stop it, which is a nightmare. So nobody wants escalation. So in a way, because we can't afford to escalate, the United States can't afford to escalate, Israel can't afford to escalate, you make it even, you give the people who are putting the pressure on you even more latitude because they know you don't want to escalate. So they're going to push the envelope even more and create more and more pressure. And that's what's happening right now. This is the untold aspect of this war, but it's this aspect that's probably going to promote, the collapse of Israel more so than just Hamas defeating Israel in Gaza.
Yeah, and maybe lastly on this, do you feel like the confluence of these various aspects of Israel's brutal onslaught and what it's produced, both in its troubles with fighting Hamas on its own terrain and the fact that that there is an axis of resistance that has been managing a conflict escalator that is prepared to move up. Do you feel like, given that Biden has given this deadline, that Israel will actually follow it? Because Israel's capacity for rational military and political behavior, especially since the aftermath of October 7th, appears to have diminished nearly to non-existence. I'm curious on your thoughts about that.
I mean, it's a tough political question here in America because of the control that the Israeli lobby has over everything. Congress, the presidency, the media, the spin. So it's an uphill struggle to get America to, change its policy regarding Israel. In the past, it was Israel can do no wrong. We support Israel no matter what. But we're now paying a price for that. And so I do believe you're going to see pressure being put on Israel. I think Netanyahu is finished. I think he's going to go. I think Biden is going to make it clear that continued American support of Israel is contingent upon a change in the Netanyahu government. We pretend that it doesn't mean Netanyahu is going to go, but if you dissolve this right-wing coalition, then Netanyahu can't continue as prime minister because it's consensus-driven. He has to get a ruling coalition. He won't be able to. Somebody else will step in and take over, and that's what we want. But here's the danger of all this, Danny. Here's the problem. And we got to be honest about this, because right now we're being lulled into a false sense of complacency. Hamas is kicking ass. There's no doubt about it. Hamas will not be defeated. But who likes Hamas? Does Egypt like Hamas? Nope. Does Jordan like Hamas? No. Does Syria like Hamas? Not really. They were just at war with them a couple of years ago. They tolerate Hamas. Turkey? Yeah, Turkey likes Hamas, but not that much. Not enough to go to war for them. And the further we get away, you realize that Hamas is very unpopular. And if we just erase the term Hamas and insert the term Palestinian, let's be honest, nobody cares about the Palestinians. There's a whole bunch of demonstrations taking place right now, but these are cause-effect demonstrations, meaning that if it weren't for the slaughter of the Gazans, these demonstrations wouldn't be happening. These people aren't going to go into the streets and demonstrate on behalf of a two-state solution or a one-state solution or a free Palestine. They're demonstrating because the bombing's happening. So what happens when the bombs stop falling, when the genocide stops? Are these people going to continue to be out there putting the pressure on the United States? Is the United States going to continue to feel isolated, or is it going to go back to what it was, where people say, wait a minute, so they've stopped, we don't have to turn on TV and look at dead Palestinian babies anymore? Oh, thank God. So let's get back to what we were doing, which is chugging along with normal economic activity where the Palestinians are problematic. We don't want to do it. And so the danger here is that all the sacrifice that the Palestinians have made, and believe me, they are making the suffering they're doing through, and you see there's a growing recognition amongst them that they have to do this. This is their burden to pay to get statehood, that all of that will be for naught, because there will be a desire to, we don't want to embarrass Israel. We don't want to humiliate Israel. We're going to look for a compromise solution where we have a moderate Israeli government who will return to giving lip service to, reviving Oslo, but never really being serious about reviving Oslo. And gradually the Palestinians will be forgot again. I'm afraid that's the direction that we're heading. And so, it's imperative that the international community find a way to sustain this pressure, because change will happen because the United States feels the pressure. I mean, when we start turning on Israel, the pressure is working. All right. But the problem is, let's say we get Israel to change, the fighting stops in Gaza. Now the United Nations comes in with their, because the UN doesn't like the Palestinians either. I mean, nobody likes the Palestinians. They've been getting screwed by everybody forever. And so you start turning it over to these old institutions, and it's forgotten. The only one out there articulating right now for the Palestinians seriously is Iran. And here's where the hope is, because Iran has good relations with two nations who are the nemesis of the United States in the geopolitical arena, Russia and China. And Russia and China have historically kept sort of a hands-off approach to the Palestinian issue. But I think Russia and China, I think they do care about the Palestinians. There's a genuine concern. You see, Putin articulating things that no Western leader has ever articulated about what Israel is doing, criticizing Israel. And China's talking about getting engaged. And it's in China's interest to take advantage of what's going on to expand. Because what is Gaza going to need? Infrastructure development. Who's pretty good at that? China. So it's an opportunity for China. It also, if you keep pushing the necessity of a Palestinian state to resolve this Arab-Israeli conflict, you keep putting pressure on the United States too. What the United States wants to do is quickly get back to, even though Biden says that we won't be returning to October 6th, I guarantee you all the U.S. wants to do is get back to October 6th. That's all we want to do. We're not looking forward to any of this innovative political stuff in the Middle East. It scares us. Russia and China, on the other hand, are looking forward to something like that. So I'm not giving up hope for the Palestinians, but I am saying that all this stuff that we're seeing, all this pressure, these votes at the UN, that can disappear that quick. And you know it. You know it can, because we're not talking about, a deep foundation of love for the Palestinians out there in the world. We don't like seeing dead Palestinian kids. So people are rallying to the cause of Palestine. But when the kids stop dying, will that support for Palestine still be there? And that's the big question.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a big question, and I share your sentiment about where the hope is, because yes, Iran is indeed a very serious actor when it comes to supporting Palestine. And I think you're exactly right. Both Russia and China, when it comes to this region, see the Palestine question as both one of course, standing for international law. That's what Russia and China like to do. They like to promote it because it's within their interests. Most stable, rational countries who are thinking about both their own development and what's good for the world in terms of their own development. It's stability. It's peace. It's not having this massive conflict which could lead that's genocidal in nature, that could lead to a very hot war between most countries in the region. That is an ultimate disaster for Russia and China. So of course this Palestine question is so important to not just stabilize, but also Russia and China are the only countries outside of the region, for the most part, outside of some outliers that don't have the same kind of influence. But the biggest countries that do support a Palestinian state and legitimately do, not giving lip service like Blinken does when he says we're for this two-state solution, and then green lights the absolute eradication of it that Israel is pursuing. Both Russia and China actually do support this.
Yeah, and we are living in an age of geopolitical transformation. I mean, it sounds very academic. It sounds like geopolitics 201. Your junior level course in college for that international relations degree. But it's real and it's happening, and it's in many ways it's exciting, but in many ways it's scary. Because we collectively, the world have for so long grown accustomed to American hegemony. We can talk about how we're opposed to it, and everybody's like, we're against American imperialism. We're against hegemony. We're against the rules-based international order. Of course you are, except you're not, because you are for stability. And while there is a whole bunch of instability in the world out there, there's a whole bunch of stability that's brought about by this. And people are lulled into a false sense of complacency by the perception of stability. And right now, this transformation that's taking place from the American singularity to this global multipolarity, BRICS and all that stuff, it scares people, because it means you have to put your faith and your trust in something else. Now, if you're somebody who has been disrupted by the American singularity, yeah, you're ready to jump ship. But if you're somebody whose life has been chugging along in relative comfort, it's a scary proposition, a frightening proposition. So it's not, automatic logic where people say, well, America's failed, so we're going to jump on the Chinese and the Russian ship. Well, for many places in the world, America hasn't failed. We didn't get to be number one because we're a bunch of losers. Okay, we did some things right, and we bullied our way to the top. Whatever you want to say, but America is a very powerful nation that has a lot of successes attached to it, and a lot of people around the world found those successes attractive. Especially the political and economic elites who make money off the American singularity. And so this idea that we're just going to seamlessly transfer power over to the Russians and the Chinese, that ain't going to happen. This is a very scary time. And it would be scary if this transformation was taking place in a conflict-free environment. But now we start throwing in the not only the reality of war, but what's that biblical statement? Rumors of war. There will be rumors of war. There will be wars and rumors of war. So, we have real war, but we have rumors of war too, potential of conflict that is generated by the friction that comes from this transformation. It scares the crap out of me. And I think it scares the crap out of just about anybody who's out there because, is the United States willing to go gently into that good night? Dylan from Dylan Thomas here. Or are we going to rage against the dying of the light? And my fear is that we're going to rage, and we're going to lash out, and we're going to create problems. We're going to make as much friction as possible rather than doing the smart thing, which is to smoothly transition and take an important seat at the table of multipolarity. We're going to resist that for as long as possible. And the consequences aren't just going to be economic and political disruption, but it can be, chaos and conflict as well. So as much as it makes sense for Russia and China to step into this Palestinian, crisis and be the leaders to get us out, it's just not that easy. America's not going to give up the role that it's enjoyed for the last, 40, 50 years as the lead influencer in the Middle East region. We're not going to, hand that mantle over to Russia and China willingly. So there's a lot of disruptive capacity out there, a lot of mischief for America to cause, going forward.
Yes, indeed, and perhaps we can close the program on this. You wrote a couple of articles in the last couple of weeks. One of them was for Energy Intelligence. You wrote about, is the U.S. still an essential nation? And you also wrote for RT recently an article about the U.S. military's multi-trillion-dollar fraud. And there were a lot of interlocking, very interconnected points about everything that you just stated. And so I wanted to ask you to close here, with regard to these developments. You are also trying to build a campaign, waging peace. You're trying to develop a film. I'll pull all of this stuff up as you're talking. Given that the United States is spending so much on its military, and all of its maneuvers and its leadership are committed to these maneuvers, point to a pretty disastrous conflict that you say with Russia, with China, and you also have this unresolved and with what's gone on with Israel's onslaught in Gaza. Obviously, still a very relevant point, the Middle East or West Asia. That is still very much a possibility of potential hot conflict. Given all of this, I mean, one, how do you feel like your film, Waging Peace, will contribute to, helping the United States become a more rational actor on the world stage? And two, where do you see this going? Do you see, because on the one hand, we have the United States' belligerence is so clear for all of us, but on the other hand, there are some pretty stark barriers. A lot of money being spent, not a lot of wars being won, and that could very well lead to massive changes in its own right. So I'll kick it to you while I pull up your materials.
Well, I'm old school American, I guess I will say, is that I have faith in the system. I know if I glance over to the comments, I'm probably going to be eviscerated for saying that. How could you have faith in the system? How could you? Look, if I don't have faith in the system, if I don't believe in the potential of this country, then what the hell do I believe in? I mean, America doesn't exist. It's not, it's not a viable entity. And I'm not willing to go down that route. So I hold out hope that the American people will be able to be awakened by all that's happening around him. I wrote this article in RT, and one of the things I talk in there is about the fact that the United States has grown so accustomed to throwing money at the Department of Defense because we just assumed that if we funded it, then America will be able to win every war in the world. And what the American people are finding out is that not only could we not defeat the Taliban, not only could we not defeat Al-Qaeda, we can't beat Russia, China. We can't beat anybody. We can't beat Iran. We don't have the ability to do this. And yet we're spending all this money. And so I think there's a growing sense of betrayal. And the idea of, America being the essential nation, we can't be the essential nation when we don't allow ourselves to be essential. I mean, essential means useful. America is essential because you can't solve a problem without America there. But when America becomes the problem, we're not essential. We're the opposite of essential. We're disposable, and that's the world is finding out, especially because America's been operating with this our way or the highway. The way they isolated him, he's a man who has outlived his usefulness. He was, somebody who was handpicked to be brought in. I mean, if you take a look at his TV show, Servant of the People, take a look who funded it, the timing of it in relation to the building him up as a presidential candidate to replace Poroshenko. You see the hidden hand of Western intelligence there, primarily MI6, but the CIA as well. And we know this. I mean, again, Scott, there's a lot of speculation taking place there, isn't there? Well, I don't know. What was one of the most famous sayings that Zelensky had early on this conflict? The first poster that came out. I know it's on the tip of my tongue. I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. Do you remember that? I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. Because somebody had dared say, why doesn't the CIA get him out so he can go live in his mansion in Miami? I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. All over headlines. I mean, and that was the
tough
beginning
guy.
of the Zelensky war guy, tough guy. Now he's wearing all his.
He's out there. He's in the fatigues. He comes to Congress in the fatigues. People are saying get a damn suit, but he's in his armored fatigues. Yeah.
I mean, I tried to tell him, Zelensky, green only counts when you have the Eagle Globe and Anchor on it, pal. Otherwise, you're just a fake, and he is a fraud. But the point is, they built him up. But then the truth came out. Somebody asked, hey, we've been looking all over for when was this speech made? When did he make this statement? Do you have it on recording? Is there something here? And finally, a statement came out of the U.S. Embassy. Well, Zelensky actually didn't say that. That was a statement made by a CIA official attached to the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. Oh, so the CIA is scripting everything. Yes, now you've broken the code. Zelensky is literally an actor. He's an actor playing a part. There's no original thought in that poor little man's mind. He's reading script after script after script. And you know what happens? I mean, everybody's seen it when you watch a good TV series. The first season's outstanding. Then they go into the second season, you're going, what the hell happened to the writing?
Especially these days in the era of streaming, especially with all of these programs, it's like one season good, and then the rest.
You're like, who's doing the writing? Well, the problem is you couldn't sustain. This wasn't like Servant of the People that I think got 5 seasons out of it. They're having trouble. They had a good first season. Zelensky had a good first season. He really did. Hell, he won an Oscar. I mean, just ask Sean Penn. He won an Oscar. I mean, so yeah. But
Sean Penn wants to melt the rest of his for ammunition. Ukraine certainly needs it. But
the second season, it's not going well. The poor writing and everything. So, you know what happens when the season starts to fall? You got to kill off some people. You got to bring in new blood, and I think Zelensky is going to be killed off. Literally, maybe, but at a minimum, he's just going to disappear, and they're going to bring in somebody else because this is all grotesque theater. theater of the absurd. Every aspect, from the Canadian Parliament, which was a scripted event, up until, again, the whole thing about bad writing is you don't realize it's bad writing until you actually air the episode and all the critics go, what the hell was that? And suddenly everybody just wakes up and goes, wow, that was really bad writing. Well, why didn't you review that in the lead up to everything about this script is bad from the count? Why? Again, to show you that why it's this PR running this. No military professional would ever broadcast the counteroffensive the way the Ukrainians did. They literally scripted exactly what they're doing. Literally scripted, and the Russians went, thank you very much. And they built this defensive line, and now everybody's surprised. The Russians have built a very extensive defense. You told them where you're going to attack, man. They
just read The Economist. That's all they had to do. Read The Economist, read the Wall Street Journal.
And you told them when you're going to attack, and you told them with what kind of forces you're going to attack. Not only that, you told them what tactics you're going to use. General Miley, I think in May, goes to Germany, and he's there, and it was hilarious because you read the article. Undisclosed military training base in an undisclosed NATO country because we have to protect the operational security. Miley, well, we're out here doing combined arms training. We're taking U.S. doctrine and we're bringing it together in a training package so that the Ukrainians can use combined arms training in their attack. They're going to revamp their tactics to use NATO tactics, and the Russians are going, rewind that. Thank you very much. Guys, pull out NATO tactics, combined arms training. Okay, let's revamp our defenses. They literally told the Ukrainians everything. They might as well have handed the operational plan to the Russians and said, this is what's going to happen. That's why they got their butts kicked. This is poorly written theater. Horribly written. They're trying to score points by they released all this because they have to convince you and me and the rest of the Western audience that there's really going to be a counteroffensive. Because people were starting to say, why are we sending all that money there? What's the purpose of this again? I mean, there was that whole battle of Bakhmut. Everybody's forgotten about that. The meat grinder, 70,000 dead Ukrainians, grinding them up. Why are they doing it? People are starting to get a little, no. Hey, our ratings are going down, screenwriter. What do we got to do? Let's reintroduce, episode 10, the counteroffensive. The general approaches the desk. He looks at the reporter with a very stern look, and he says, we're going to launch a counteroffensive. And then you have to write and tell everybody what the counter, because this is theater. You don't fight a war this way, but that's exactly what's happening. Everything the West does is spin. It's spin. It's tragic spin because there's a lot of people dying, mostly Ukrainian. But it's not war. It's not military art. And frankly speaking, everybody in NATO involved in this, everybody in the U.S. military, should be relieved for incompetence. If the U.S. Army threw American lives away this callously, they would be hauled before Congress, and they'd probably get some sort of subpoena for criminal negligence. Yeah, it would be the end of their.
And the American public themselves would be a scandal. I mean, the number of casualties in Iraq, Afghanistan, these places paled in comparison to what's happening
in World War II. In the Battle of Tarawa, the Marines had a very bad day. Their amphibious vessels they had a mistake about the tides, and they thought they were going to be able to take their amphibious craft right into the shore, and instead they got stuck on reefs about a mile out, and the Marines had to wade in chest high water, a mile of water, getting machine gunned down by the Japanese. There's no cover. You just got to keep walking, and you're either going to live or you're going to die. You don't get a choice. The Japanese machine gunner gets to decide that. The photographs of the bodies bobbing in the water, piled up on the sand, were prohibited to be published to the American people at the time. And indeed, the Marines were told, you can't have another battle like this, or else Congress is just going to say, what the hell's going on? Because already Congress is asking the question, why did you lose so many guys for this tiny little island? How did you go about losing this many people? Nobody wanted to talk about it. But, and that's just a couple thousand Marines. Imagine going to Congress and saying, because Congress going, hey, we gave you all that money. You guys built up four armies. Where are they? Well, 8 to 9 out of every 10 guys that we train are dead or wounded now. That's again, I'm not making that up. The military commissar of Poltava gave a statement. He said, out of every 100 guys that have been mobilized in Poltava, 80 to 90 of them are either dead or wounded. That's 80 to 90% casualty rate. Remember earlier I said 50 to 69% make combat ineffective. 80 to 90 means you ain't around anymore. You got nothing. So they're just, if this went up to the U.S. Congress, in World War II, they had on the European theater, the 36th Division, I think, was a Texas National Guard division, and they were getting ready to launch an attack across a river, the Rapino River or something in Italy, and the bombers came in. They're supposed to hit the Nazis on the other side. They greased their bombs early, and they blew the living snot out of the 36th Division, killed a whole bunch of Texans. All the Texan congressmen were screaming for blood, as they should be, incompetence like that. Now imagine having an American general hauled before Congress, and they said, what happened? Well, we got beat. Why? The Russians were better trained, better equipped than us. What do you mean? What do you mean better trained? How long does it normally take to train a soldier to do a combat breaching operation? Well, sir, by the time we do basic training, advanced training, about 2.5 years. And how long did you train the soldiers for this combat breaching operation? About 2.5 months. So you took soldiers, gave them 2.5 months training for a 2.5-year project, and you threw them into battle. Yes, sir, that's about it. But they were competent, right? I mean, at least they had good fundamental skills. Oh, no, sir, only 3 weeks of training. Well, how long does it take to train a Marine, a basic training? 13 weeks, sir. And Ukrainians, you gave them 3 weeks. Oh, yes, sir. And then you put them into equipment. Now, they were familiar with the Leopard tank, right? Oh, no, sir, they've never dealt with a Leopard tank before. How long does it take to train a Leopard tank operator? Well, sir, it takes about a year and a half to get a good Leopard crew up to speed. And how much time did you give the Ukrainians? Sir, we gave them 3 to 5 weeks. Do you see where I'm going with this, Danny? Mm-hmm. If this was an American explaining the deaths of American soldiers to U.S. Congress this way, they'd all be arrested, as they should be, criminally negligent. But now, because these are just Ukrainians, we don't care about you. This is the thing that everybody has to understand. What I just told you proves we don't care about Ukraine. We don't. If we did, we would never let this happen. We are simply using Ukraine as a vehicle to bring pain to Russia. That's it. We're willing, as Lindsey Graham said, to fight to the last Ukrainian. And that is sickening. You know, we talked about that 90-year-old Nazi and what he did during the war. You do understand that Americans are guilty of a crime that is larger than the crime that he and his Nazi colleagues committed. They killed, 100,000 Poles, 200,000 Russians, 40,000 Jews. We've killed 400,000 Ukrainian soldiers. We did it, not the Russians. Don't blame the Russians. We're the ones that led them to undertake the most complicated military operation imaginable, the breach of a heavily defended position. And we said, do this, and we didn't train them right. We didn't equip them right. We didn't prepare them. They were totally unprepared for this. And we said, go forward. And then we have the audacity halfway through it, after they've lost 71,000 guys. You heard people say, well, those Ukrainians are just casualty averse. What? You can say what you want about the Ukrainians, and I'm very critical of again, especially the leadership that has embraced Nazi ideology, etc. But the Ukrainian soldiers, even the ones with minimal training, big brass balls to do what they're doing. I challenge anybody in your audience right now, just if you get into a vehicle and drive to certain death. And if you make it, get out of the vehicle and keep advancing. These Ukrainians are courageous. And be the Russians. Imagine the Russian getting the snot pounded out by artillery, holding your position, not withdrawing, so that you can lay waste to the Ukrainians coming in. Both sides are staffed with some of the bravest soldiers imaginable. I think I told you the story, but I'll just tell it one more time, about the Battle of Bakhmut, where the Wagner troops surrounded about 20 Ukrainian soldiers in a basement. They said, surrender, brothers, surrender. We'll treat you well. We'll feed you. You'll go home, all that stuff. And what did the Ukrainians say? Russians don't surrender. And they fought to the death. Russians, they didn't say Ukrainians don't surrender. They said Russians don't surrender. Why? Because they're trained in the history and lore of the Soviet Union, of the Red Army, etc. And that's something that came out of World War I and World War II, where Russian soldiers were surrounded by the Germans and told to surrender. And they said Russians don't surrender, and they fought to the death. This war is about Slavs fighting Slavs, brothers fighting brothers, cousins fighting cousins. This is the saddest kind of war imaginable. In America, we talk about the American Civil War. This is that kind of fight taking place right now. And the tragedy is, the Russians do generally, they genuinely care about the Ukrainians. You just see video after video of Russian soldiers going in, taking care of the wounded, evacuating. There's a new sick video out where the Russians actually came in and picked up the Ukrainians that were abandoned by their own side. They treat them, give them first aid, and they start to evacuate them. There's a Ukrainian drone overhead watching this. And as the Russians start to evacuate, the Ukrainian drone calls in Ukrainian artillery fire to kill the Russians who were rescuing wounded Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are, their leadership scum. The Russians actually treat the Ukrainians with respect. They capture them, they feed them, they give them first aid. There's a whole video of, and I know a lot of this is propaganda, but it's still sincere. They invite the families to come in and visit the prisoners of war. So the girlfriends, the wives, the mothers all get to come and visit their sons, their husbands, their relatives in prison. I mean, this is tragic. The Russians care more about the Ukrainians than we do.
Yeah, and I think what's even more sick about this too is, as we were talking about earlier, that there's a script being written for Zelensky and for Ukraine's so-called leadership, and it almost feels like now, as we were talking about, the seasons, or this current season is just poorly written. It almost feels like at this very moment there really isn't much of a script left, and you have Zelensky kind of lashing out at the mouth, and it seems like there's a lot more tension here, and at the same time that there's this tension between basically his masters and himself, there's also this change in the narrative, which to me is even more heinous and underscores a lot of what you're saying here in terms of the difference between how the Ukraine's government, how NATO, how the United States are treating Ukrainians as compared to Russia. Now they're talking about a long war of attrition. This, mind you, for months and months and months, all of the people who pay attention to this stuff with a non-neocon mentality have been talking about Russia fighting a war of attrition. Now the collective West is saying, oh no, this is a war of attrition and we need to fight this till the end. And you have Alexei Arestovich talking about 2035. I mean, will there be any Ukraine left if that's the case? This is the leadership. This is basically all the leaders of this project now talking in this manner of, yeah, we'll just permanently do this to Ukraine. It'll just happen on and on and on and on, and we won't change our tune. We'll just continue to throw them out there until we can't any longer.
Look, it takes two to tango. I mean, first of all, I always find it funny that the West talks about a frozen thing, a negotiated ceasefire, etc. But isn't it Zelensky that had his parliament pass a law that prohibits any talk of negotiation? And the Russians keep saying, you guys want us to negotiate, but I mean, you might want to talk to Zelensky to get the parliament to repeal the law that says he can't negotiate. But the Russians have made it clear, and again, they throw the words back of the West. Early on, Stoltenberg and others were saying that because the Russians don't want to negotiate, this is a war that will be decided on the battlefield. On the battlefield. Okay, well, and now they're going negotiating, and the Russians are going, no, I like that other thing you were saying. It's decided on the battlefield because that's where it's going to be decided. There will be no negotiation. First of all, who are they going to negotiate with? They tried it with the Ukrainians, the same ones that are there right now. They lied. Remember, Zelensky actually negotiated a treaty that was ready, a ceasefire agreement that could have brought an end to this war. The Germans and the French lied to the Russians about the Minsk Accords. There's a sham just to buy time to build up the Ukrainian army. Why are they going to believe them again? America's lied about everything we've ever done with Russia. Who are the Russians going to trust on this one? There's no one to trust. And if you can't trust, then you can't have negotiations. Plus, the Russians have made it clear that they have objectives that they're non-negotiable. And the Ukrainians have put forward just such unrealistic positions. I mean, the Russians have to withdraw to 1991 borders. Isn't going to happen. The Russians have to turn over their government to the International Criminal Court to be tried as war criminals. That ain't going to happen. The Russians have to pay reparations. That's not going to happen. I mean, it's stupid. It's if I could sit down and write demands to my town council and go to the town council meeting. I need you to dissolve the police department and give me all that money so I can build a golf course in my backyard. Well, that's not going to happen, Scott. Well, we're not going to have a settlement here until that happens. That's one of my conditions. Well, Scott, that's totally unrealistic. But nobody's telling Zelensky. Well, actually, everybody told Zelensky. Remember, there was that peace summit they had in Saudi Arabia where like 30 nations came together, and Zelensky went, sent his guys down there, and they're like, here's our 10-point peace plan, total surrender by the Russians. And everybody else went, that ain't going to happen. You're so far off base. The Russians right now are in unconditional surrender mode. I mean, listen to Lavrov, listen to Putin, listen to everybody that speaks on this. They're not there. There will be no negotiation. Ukraine will have to, agree to very specific things. But the sooner Ukraine agrees to it, the sooner this war can end, and the more territory Ukraine will have. Ukraine will never get Kherson back, never get Zaporizhia back, never get Lugansk back, never get Donetsk back. They will definitely never get Crimea back. But right now they can hold on to everything else. But if they continue this conflict and it goes on, if the Russians do push forward and start forcing the Ukrainians into this precipitous retreat, the Russians could very well end up having Kharkov, Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, probably swing over, take Odessa, drive up to Transnistria, which means that entire Black Sea coast will be denied to the Ukrainians going forward. And once the Russians take it, at this juncture, I don't think they'd be giving it back. Again, not a Russian. They get to make their own minds. But, the Russians have made it clear that when Russian blood gets spilled on soil, it becomes Russian soil. And if the Ukrainians want to continue this fight and compel Russia to expend lives to take historically Russian cities like Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, Sumy, majority population, Russian populations, they're never going to give them back. Again, I hearken people to listen to Vladimir Putin's speeches, 2005 presentation, I believe, given in April. The one where he said that one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union, and everybody jumped in and went, see, that old Putin, he just wants to bring the Soviet Union back. But they didn't listen to the rest of the speech where he said, because overnight tens of millions of Russians became homeless. I am the president of the Russian nation. The Russian nation isn't defined by the borders of the Russian Federation. It's defined by the location of the Russian people, people who have common culture, heritage, religion, language. And the people of Eastern Ukraine are, in the minds of Putin, part of the Russian nation. That doesn't mean that he wants to take them. Remember, in March, Russia was willing to give back these territories to Ukraine, but he just wants that the Ukrainian government treats the Russian population with respect, allows them to speak their language, worship the way they want to, etc. The Ukrainians are the one who committed, basically ethnic and cultural genocide against the Russians. So the Russians aren't going to yield on any of this. And once they take Russian territory, territory that's populated by a majority Russian population, I don't see a situation where they give it back. Not at this stage of the game.
Time in Israel has been quite brutal in my lifetime in many different occasions. Has the public relations been so poor for Israel? I mean, even in these past incursions into Gaza, past bombing campaigns, even when there were massive numbers of Palestinians being killed, there was this justification, whether it was Hamas, terrorism, or whether it was just the spirit of Zionism that really held and stuck, especially in the West. And it was easy to kind of put Palestinians aside. It seems like the energy against Israel is stronger. And I think that's both cumulative over the years. More and more people, especially American Jews, getting kind of fed up with the war crimes. But also, I think it has to do with right now how Israel is being portrayed, and also how the United States is kind of not helping the situation. I wanted to play a video of your favorite politician, a little small clip, Lindsey Graham. I hope I don't send you to the hospital, because I know you you despise Lindsey Graham. But I think he's kind of emblematic of what we are seeing in terms of the doubling down. And so I'm going to play a small clip for you to react to, because I think this is a huge problem for the United States and for Israel, in terms of just how it's coming off in the world, and how I believe, and I want your reaction to this, how it is also contributing to the already existing weaknesses that you've pointed out to for Israel. But here we go.
Is there a threshold for you, and do you think there should be one for the United States government, at which the U.S. would say, let's hold off for a second in terms of civilian casualties? Is there a point at which you would start to question?
If somebody asked us after World War II, is there a limit what you would do to make sure that Japan and Germany don't conquer the world? Is there any limit what Israel should do to the people who are trying to slaughter the Jews? The answer is no. There is no limit. But here's what you need to do: be smart. Let's try to limit civilian casualties the best we can. Let's put humanitarian aid in areas that protect the innocent. I'm all for that. But this idea that Israel has to apologize for attacking Hamas, who's embedded with their own population, needs to stop. The goal is to destroy Hamas. Hamas is creating these casualties, not Israel.
I don't think anyone's
Civilian casualties.
So, your reaction, Scott?
Well, I just want to point out that Lindsey Graham is a lawyer, and he's a U.S. Air Force lawyer, which means that he has been versed in the laws of war. He knows, for instance, the principle of distinction. He knows what distinction is, and you can't drop a bomb. You can't put a round down range unless you've made a distinction between civilian and military. Now, yeah, if there's commingling, you've got issues. And then the concept of proportionality comes in. What's proportional? For instance, to take out one Hamas leader who wasn't, he was a regional, battalion commander, the guy that was supposedly at this refugee camp. There's no way America would ever allow the issue of proportionality to come in and say, we're going to put a bomb on target there that's going to kill 400 people to get one battalion commander. That's disproportional use of force, and that would be rejected. Any American who did that would be prosecuted for violating the laws of war. Lindsey knows this. He's better than that. But see, he's a politician. He's the slimiest kind of politician. He's a politician that's been pushing war forever. He operates totally outside the framework of law. He knows that everything he said there is wrong. There can be no collective punishment, Lindsey. You know that, Lindsey. You've been trained on that, but you are literally the worst kind of American. He is the worst American possible. If there's a way to strip people of their citizenship because of their failure to adhere to constitutional norms and values, then Lindsey should have his citizenship stripped, and then he should be tarred and feathered and marched off to wherever the hell we send, failed Americans. But no, he's horrible. He's useless, but he's playing to a base. It's the same base that Nikki Haley's playing to, or Vivek. Did you see that video clip where we're going to put 100 Hamas heads on stakes? Hey, that ain't how we operate, buddy. I know you're just an entrepreneur. I know you made your money, fraudulently peddling pharmaceuticals. But we don't cut off heads in the U.S. military and put them on spikes and hanging out there. That's a war crime. Marines got in trouble, rightfully so, for peeing on dead Taliban in Afghanistan. You can't desecrate the dead, boss. You're never going to be president of the United States. You just disqualified yourself right there because you're a war criminal in the making. So is Nikki Haley. Every word she says out there about tweeting is all about collective punishment, no concept of distinction, proportionality. what gets me is Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley and all these other people sat there and they were citing the law of war, verse by verse about Russia and Ukraine, the Battle of Mariupol. This is indiscriminate collective punishment. There's no distinction between, when actually, and again, I do know the law of war when I studied the Battle of Mariupol, and I have by speaking to a lot of people who were there on the ground looking at the evidence. The Russians actually carried out a textbook example on how to adhere to the law of war in the most difficult of situations. They lost a lot of guys in Mariupol. They didn't need to lose because they didn't want to stand back and level a building with civilians in it. They actually assaulted forward to gain control of the basement to evacuate the civilians under fire before they went back in and cleared the building by hand. Again, under the assumption that somewhere upstairs there might be other civilians that they don't want to kill. They didn't go in there in Mariupol and level buildings. In Bakhmut, it was different. In Bakhmut, the civilian population had already fled. And so the buildings where the Ukrainians were in, there were no civilians there. And so now you can drop a bomb, put the building down, which they did. But in Mariupol, where there was a significant civilian population, the Russians ran a textbook operation adhering to the laws of war. Nothing about what Israel is doing today is textbook. And yet, Russia was called out by everybody as being a major violator, gross violator of international law and all that stuff. The Israelis, on the other hand, the Americans, we're not even trying to pretend that Israel is adhering to the law of war. We're basically just saying the law of war doesn't matter when it comes to Israel. And that sadly is the truth. No law has ever mattered when it comes to Israel. International law doesn't matter. The Security Council has passed resolutions. The General Assembly has passed resolutions, and Israel ignores every single one of them.
Yeah. And the United States stands right by, just continuously rejecting resolution after resolution. And you see the split quite clearly with regard to where nations and countries stand on this, with China and Russia supporting humanitarian assistance, supporting an actual ceasefire, while the United States and its vassal states continue to obstruct, despite the fact that now they're kind of all have their hands and their thumbs up there, what's, trying to figure out how to get out of a bad situation. Because as I said, the public relations, and as you intimated, the public relations around this are incredibly bad. Most of even the mainstream war machine lovers, usually Joy and Reed tends to be on that side. But it seems like the tone and the mood is shifting here.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know, Danny, you want me to keep these answers short, but there ain't nothing simple in life. I think people need to understand that the U.S. wasn't always, bought and owned by the Israeli lobby. There was a time when we actually had a very big Arab lobby, the Arabists in the State Department, in the Pentagon, etc. There was a time when, in the lead up to the Gulf War back in 1990, Paul Wolfowitz got so mad at the Israeli government that he basically, hung up the phone and then had his secretary call and give them a number to the White House switchboard and said, call when you're serious about talking about, settlements. But until then, we don't want to talk to you. Could you imagine a White House doing that today, hanging up on a prime minister and telling him to stick it where the sun don't shine? There was pushback. The name Jonathan Pollard, does that mean anything to anybody nowadays? He's, of course, the American Jew who spied on behalf of Israel, and didn't spy in a little way. He stole the crown jewels. The crown jewels is a big book of all the frequencies that we monitor in the world, and how important they are. What information's on it? Are they encrypted? Have we solved the encryption? That's it. If you got the crown jewels, you'll know that we're listening to your phone call, you're listening to this, and then you'll stop talking. He took that and gave it to the Israeli government. And then the Israeli government, because they're such good friends of America, sold it to the Soviets, who sat there and said, thank you very much. And we literally overnight lost billions of dollars of surveillance capability, because everything we thought we were doing, now the Soviets knew. If they kept it going, they were passing us disinformation. If they shut it down, we didn't know where they shut it down to. And now we're going blind. So Jonathan Pollard did that on behalf of the state of Israel. That created a lot of animosity in a big section of the American government. And so there was always this pushback. And at that time, the pro-Israeli lobby had to become very aggressive and very innovative in their tactics. When I was running around trying to get Congress not to support this war in Iraq, I would go to, the senator's office, knock on the door. I'd get a 45-minute meeting, sit there and talk. And as I came out, there's a group of AIPAC guys. I knew them because when I resigned, they tried to recruit me. They wanted me to speak at the AIPAC conference. They offered me bribes. They offered me the whole thing to join their team. All I'd have to do is say that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Well, I ain't going to lie. Even if you offer me $6 million, which they did, I ain't going to lie. So there went that deal. But they're bird dogging me going in, and they're reminding everybody, senators, congressmen alike, will primary you. That's their weapon, the primary. They write checks, but so do other people. What they can do is primary you. And a primary is a kiss of death. Primary isn't you running against a Democrat or Republican. A primary is they putting somebody up within your own party and putting pressure on the normal funding channels to drop you. You have to burn through all your money to now do a primary you weren't planning on doing, because you're building a war chest to run for election against the opposing political party, and you've burned yourself out. It's going to be a dirty campaign. All your dirty laundry is going up, and your other party opponents sitting there taking notes, and they're going to crush you in the general election. Primary is the kiss of death. That's what AIPAC does better than anybody else. And they go, we're going to primary you. And the long story short is, eventually, the Arabists were annihilated. The pro-Zionist lobby won. They were victory. They won. They own. This isn't anti-Semitic when I say this. Please don't interpret it. It's just a statement of fact. They own everything. And it's been a strategy that they played. They own Congress. Benjamin Netanyahu brags about it. There's videos about him saying how he owns Congress. He bought them all. They all sing for him. He's a man of such arrogance and hubris. He came during a presidential election and spoke to Congress in a way to promote, Barack Obama's opponent. No one does that, but he did it because he doesn't care, because they literally have a blank check. Nobody held him. Nobody in Congress said, get the hell out of my country. I would have. That's why I would never get elected to Congress. But if Benjamin Netanyahu came to my house, the people's house, stood up and articulated against a sitting president during a re-election, I would have jumped out of my seat, rushed the stage, snapped his neck, and thrown his dead body outside, because that's what you do to people who interfere with your elections. We sit there and go, the Russians interfere. Hell no. Nobody interferes in an American election like the Israelis do. They have bought everybody in Congress. They own Congress. But worse than that, and this is where Ms. Reed's statement comes, they own the media. AIPAC owns, and again, this isn't the Jews. AIPAC. Look, I was there. I told you, when I resigned, I was recruited. They came at me hard from everywhere. They come out of the woodworks. I'd be doing a hit at NBC, MSNBC. It was funny enough, 6-month contract I had with them. And the producers come up and they hand me their AIPAC cards. Hey, Scott, we need to talk. Hey, Scott, we need to talk. Hey, Scott, let's have lunch. Hey, Scott. Hey, Scott. Hey, Scott. It is the Jewish lobby, not the Jewish. Sorry, that's anti-Semitic. That one you can hit me on. Okay. It's the pro-Israeli lobby. It's not the Jewish lobby. That's a horrible thing. I apologize for that. It's the Israeli lobby, the pro-Israeli. They are everywhere. They own everything. They run everything, and they all conspire together. They spy on behalf of Israel. There again, go back and look at what happened around the time when I resigned in the late 1990s, early 2000s. There was a scandal where a guy named Rosen, I think, in AIPAC, was conspiring with guys in the Department of Defense to get classified documents out so that he could hand them to this Israeli diplomat, the same diplomat that I worked with when I was at the United Nations. He was my cutout to Israeli intelligence, except I had permission to do that. But it turns out he was also a cutout between AIPAC and all that. The Israelis spy on America nonstop, and it was open book, everything. And what I'm trying to get at is, for most of this century, from 2000, especially after 2001, the global war on terror, the whole thing, until today, Israel's gotten a free ride. They don't even have to work for it. They don't. It's a free ride. All AIPAC has to do is open up a conference, put up a sign, and look at how everybody runs to AIPAC. Everybody got to speak at AIPAC, got to speak at AIPAC, got to speak at AIPAC. It's embarrassing. And literally, AIPAC doesn't hide it anymore. They are literally a front for Israel, but we're not allowed to call them that, or it's anti-Semitic. We're not allowed to say AIPAC needs to register as a foreign agent. No, anti-Semitic. AIPAC is an Israeli front. They are literally buying the United States Congress. And if you're an American, I don't care if you're Christian, Muslim, Jew, agnostic, atheist, I don't care. This should insult you that a foreign power has bought the Congress. Look at the new Speaker of the House. First order of business, ladies and gentlemen, when America's fallen apart at the seams, homeless, you name it, we got problems. First order of business, I'm going to pass money.
Unfortunately, George, you're 100% correct. I mean, this is a conflict that cannot end until one side or the other has been decisively beaten and is willing to make the kind of compromises that they're not willing to make now. And frankly speaking, given the level of suffering that the Palestinian people have undergone over the past 7 decades, they're not likely to be the side that breaks first. Israel is a fundamentally broken nation morally. It's a nation that, regardless of what you think, I know some people take umbrage at this, but I happen to be somebody who believes that Israel has the right to exist, and that we should respect Israel's right to exist, but not in the way that it exists today. You can't exist on the backs of people that you've enslaved, and they have enslaved the Palestinians. In fact, it's worse than slavery, because slaves at least get to have the pretense of working in the fields, pretending for a moment maybe they're free. The Palestinians, especially those in Gaza, are stuck in this open-air prison, not of their own construct. Israel underwent a fundamental change in its demographics and politics in the 1990s when they opened the doors to the former Soviet Union, and hundreds of thousands of Soviet Jews fled to Israel, altering the balance. When I was in Israel in the 1990s, there was a struggle between right and left, but both agreed that there was a necessity for peace. However imperfect their political solutions might have been, I know for a fact that Yitzhak Rabin was looking for a peaceful outcome, looking for a settlement before he was assassinated by a right-wing Israeli. And now Benjamin Netanyahu has stepped into the gap, and ever since then, Israel has been drifting towards an even more radical right-wing solution. As long as Benjamin Netanyahu and his ilk are in power in Israel, there is no hope for peace, none whatsoever. And you are right, Israel will go into Gaza with a vengeance, and hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinians will lose their lives. And in the end, some morally conscious nation, and I say that with the greatest, I don't believe it. There's no such thing as a morally conscious nation that keeps their tongue silent now. But some nation, the United States perhaps, will say enough is enough. Even we can't stomach the slaughter that you have perpetrated, and it's time to bring this fighting to a halt. And the cycle will begin all over again until the next time. Now, the only hope for this outcome not to go that way is if Hezbollah gets involved in a major way and breaks the paradigm. And if Hezbollah is backed by Syria and Syria is backed by Iran, and then we will see the strategic defeat of Israel. We may see the end of Benjamin Netanyahu physically or politically, and whatever replaces him in Israel will be somebody who is compelled by this defeat to seek peace in a way that's equitable for the Palestinian people. But until which time Israel is strategically defeated, there's no hope for peace. none whatsoever, because Israel, as it currently exists, can't have peace, because peace requires them to treat the Palestinian people with respect, with dignity. And Israel today is incapable of treating the Palestinian people with the respect and dignity, not only that they deserve, but that they demand. What happened yesterday, as violent and ugly as it was a manifestation of the demand that Palestinians be treated seriously, with respect. I, like everybody else, I think shudders at the death and destruction that took place. I wish it had never happened. But you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind, and Israel is reaping the whirlwind right now as we speak. It's tragic, but tragically it's necessary.
What do you say, Scott, to those who doubt the scale of the negligence that appears to have been involved in all of this being planned? It clearly was planned. The build-up to it must have been long in the making. And yet this most heavily surveyed patch of earth in the world, all this was taking shape and then executed with quite spectacular levels of military success, however ghastly.
Look, there's no doubt that Hamas has pulled off, and this will be studied for years. Again, military professionals have to put aside politics and study military events with a professional eye. And what Hamas did yesterday is one of the most remarkable military feats in modern history. First of all, to be able to plan this without being detected by the Israelis is, as you indicate, almost miraculous. Now, I have an answer as to how this came about. I actually have just written an article. It'll come out in Consortium News later this afternoon that addresses this issue. But I think this, Winston Churchill once famously said that he quipped about the War Office that they are always fighting the last war, never the next war. Israel is guilty of that in my mind. They are fighting 2021, Operation, I forget whatever, they named so many things, Wall Guardian or Guardian on Walls or something like that.
Been so many of them, yeah.
But Israel openly bragged at the end of this conflict, which they claim to have won, and yet Hamas still exists. They said this was the first artificial intelligence war. That you mentioned it. It's the most heavily surveilled piece of terrain in the world. Every 10 minutes, every meter of Gaza is photographed by Israel. And that data, those images go into a giant computer database. They collect every cell phone conversation, every text message, any email messaging. They have total control. They have human spies on the ground. And Israel bragged about this right afterwards in 2022. The first artificial intelligence battle, we had total domination of the information spectrum, and we were able to use artificial intelligence to predict outcomes, meaning that it wasn't a human being now that is telling Israel what to do. It is a computer algorithm put together by Israeli intelligence, and the Israelis bragged about this. And I will say this about Hamas and about the Palestinians and about Hezbollah. They aren't stupid. These are some of the smartest people on the planet, and they are survivors. And as soon as they heard that Israel had turned over the thinking process to a computer, I believe they sat there and they gamed the system. And they sat there and they created a whole bunch of artificial information that lulled the computer into a false sense of complacency. And because the Israelis had yielded their thinking ability to a computer, they went into Yom Kippur mode. And I don't mean this year, I mean 1973, where once again, all the information was there that an attack was going to take place. Hamas said an attack was going to take place. This is not a secret. Hamas has been saying over and over and over again, this is coming. We are going to do this. We will avenge the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So any thinking person, any rational person would have said, we need to prepare for this. But because Israel yielded its thought process to a computer programmed by people who did not respect Hamas, this intelligence failure took place. That's what I firmly believe.
Now, the whole of the south of Israel was, for a time, out with the control of the government in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. The Palestinian militants, the factions, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, many groups, some of which I actually hadn't heard of before. They were all running amok. They were attacking settlements and settlers. They were defeating Israeli forces that they found. They were capturing Israeli police stations, military bases, prisons even. Why did it take Israel so long to get on top of the situation, even given the caveats that you've just made about how they missed it coming in the first place?
Well, there's a couple reasons. I mean, first of all, we'll never know until the Israelis do an honest to goodness, form a commission to do a politically neutral autopsy on what happened here. But I can speculate, and I just want everybody to understand that that's exactly what's happening right now is speculation. Israel has been a fundamentally broken state in terms of domestic politics for some time now, ever since Bibi Netanyahu returned as prime minister. His corruption followed him, his attempt to shield himself from prosecution by taking over the court system so that he and he alone can appoint judges that are favorable to his position has divided this nation, the nation of Israel, like never before. Prior to the Hamas attack, there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets on a regular basis to protest Benjamin Netanyahu. Thousands of Israeli reservists, the very reservists who are being called up now, said they will not serve an Israel that has a Bibi Netanyahu who violates the basic fundamentals of law there. So Israel was a divided nation. The military also, I believe, has just taken a unique stance regarding modern warfare. Look, there are many Russians right now who have learned the hard lessons of war over the course of the past 600 plus days in Ukraine, who are looking at the imagery of the Israeli military response saying these are the most amateurish people we have ever seen in our lives. Their tactics, their approach, the timid nature of these soldiers is shocking. I think the Israeli army has lost the ability to close with and destroy the enemy through firepower and maneuver. They are so casualty averse that they've created a whole unit based upon unique technologies to let robots do the fighting for them. They let computers do the thinking for them. The last thing they want to do is put one of their soldiers on the ground against somebody who is trained and capable of killing them. They're very good at beating up women, beating up children, beating up villagers, beating up old men, old women, but they're not very good at fighting people who stand up and fight back. And let's be clear here, the Hamas people who are fighting right now, these are lightly armed people with what their courage is cannot be doubted, but their skill set is limited. These are people who have not had the advantages of the military training and technology that the Israelis had, and yet they're fighting them still today, as we speak, outside of the Gaza Strip, in Israeli territory. They hold 30% of the territory that they captured on day one, and they are fighting. The Israelis can't beat them yet. They will beat them. There's no doubt about that. But Israel has forgot how to fight. They have forgot, because Yom Kippur 1973 was so bloody for them. Their experience in Lebanon was so bloody for them that they said, never again, we won't do that kind of fighting. Unfortunately, when you raise the level of hatred in a captive population, such as the Palestinians in Gaza, and those people decide to rise up, you are going to have to fight. There's a lot of incompetence going on in Israel right now. There's tremendous amount of military incompetence. The people I feel sorry for, to be honest, I mean, I'm just being frank here, are the Israelis who lived in the South. Not because of, there's a political question of should they be there, et cetera, et cetera. But these are people who believe the Israeli government when the Israeli government said, we will keep you safe. You can go to sleep at night. You will be safe. We will be there for you. If anything happens to you, we will come for you. And they were abandoned by their government, abandoned by their military. They're still abandoned to this day. Shame on the Israeli government. Shame on the Israeli military. There should be mass resignations, but this is all done because the men and women who wear the uniform today, who didn't come to the rescue of these Israelis in their time of need, should be evicted from their positions.
If Israel does invade on the ground, and given that there are now a very substantial number, more than there have ever been before, of Israeli prisoners taken in this Al-Aqsa operation, Al-Aqsa flood, there are real problems about a ground invasion that imperils we now know many Americans are amongst those who have been taken prisoner. These prisoners, hostages, will be held in exchange, hoping to exchange them for the 5,000 plus political prisoners in Israeli jails. So a ground invasion is fraught with that difficulty of harming their own people, but also the risk of bringing Hezbollah into the conflict, and thus the possibility of a very big war, two-sided war, indeed. So do you think they are going to go in? And if so, how will that work out?
Israel conducted a major military exercise earlier this year that tested this very scenario. What would happen if an uprising in the West Bank, uprising in Gaza, Hezbollah intervenes in the north, Iran intervenes? What would Israel do? And they did this major exercise, and it turned out that Israel lost. Israel can't win that war. So Bibi Netanyahu knows this. He was the prime minister when this exercise was held. His senior military officers know this. And so I have to believe that they're not suicidal. And now the question they are probably asking themselves is Hezbollah bluffing? Will Hezbollah really commit to this fight? Or is this just a bluff, and should we call Hezbollah's bluff? Because there's a tremendous amount of political pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu now to be seen as doing something decisive to bring this Hamas issue to an end. And that requires a major military move into Gaza, which I will tell you right now, Israel will lose. Will lose. Because the Israeli army can't suffer casualties. Going into urban warfare, if you've learned anything from Mariupol, if you've learned anything from Bakhmut, these horrible names that have come out, and I say horrible because of the death and destruction that took place in the fighting for these places, Gaza will become like that and worse. The Israelis will suffer losses like they can't even imagine, greater than the Yom Kippur War in its totality. And this is politically unacceptable for Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli people. So I can't tell you what they're going to do. What I can say is that if they go into Gaza, they will have to stop their operation almost immediately, because every force there in Gaza will be needed in northern Israel, because when Hezbollah comes in, they will make what Hamas did the other day look like child's play. The entire north will fall. Haifa could be put at risk. Hezbollah will come in a very serious fashion. Their missiles, their rockets are not these bottle rockets launched by the Hamas, and I'm being a little facetious here, but those are children's toys compared to the modern precision-guided missiles that Hezbollah has. Tel Aviv will be destroyed. The Kiryat, in the center of Tel Aviv, where the military headquarters is, will be flattened. The prime minister's residence will be flattened. Israel will be flattened. Its airfields flattened. That's the future of Israel, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. The Iron Dome doesn't work. Their missile defense systems do not work. And then when Hezbollah attacks and shows victory, you think Syria is going to remain silent about the Golan Heights. No, Syria will move on the Golan Heights. They have 2 divisions they brought up to combat readiness as we speak. And if Syria gets engaged, will Iran stand on the sideline? Iran, understanding now with Hamas, Hezbollah, and Syria decisively engaged, now is the time to end the Israeli threat once and for all. And Iran will become involved. And now we've seen the strategic defeat of Israel. And This, I think, the
all,
Israelis
all of
understand.
this, all of this, Scott, is a symptom, if that's the right word, of the huge changes that are going on in the world, aren't they? That Iran was once a kind of beaten and isolated power, is now no longer isolated and militarily extremely strong, with probably the world's greatest drone industry. The axis of resistance, they call themselves, of Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Hezbollah in Lebanon is a very, very potent crescent indeed. And it's allied with the new great powers, Russia and China, who would not allow any of these places to be destroyed by an American-Israeli coalition. So this is all happening because everybody's emboldened by the new world political situation, aren't they?
Look, there was a day and age where America could put 750,000 to 1 million troops in the Middle East in a matter of weeks and change the outcome of any conflict. That day is long past. Today, we have a military that's a shadow of its former self, incapable of meaningfully projecting power into areas of the world that have been hardened against that very possibility. Iran's ability to sink American ships at a distance has changed the algorithms that are used there. And Iran knows this. America knows this. You're 100% correct. They've become emboldened, but not emboldened based upon irresponsible calculations, emboldened to be the nations they have every right to be. Iran has every right to be a major player in the region because it is a major player in the region, and it will no longer allow the United States and Israel working together with the Gulf Arab states to keep it down. In fact, thanks to China, they've repaired relations with the Saudis, and they're moving in the right direction there. The United States today is confronting its impotence in Europe and in Asia. Right now, I can guarantee you in the Situation Room at the White House, the Pentagon is saying, boss, we can't do it. We can't do anymore. We're already broke. If this thing blows up in the Middle East, it's game, set, match. We're done as an economy. Because if Iran does get pulled in and then we respond, there goes all the oil production capability in the Middle East. And that's the end of the modern era of humanity, because without that oil, the economy of the world will come screeching to a halt. They know this. And so I think the United States right now is telling Israel, you're going to have a couple days to feel good. Bomb as many buildings, because we never cared about the Palestinian people, George, you know that. Bomb as many buildings as you can, kill as many people as you want, but then it's over because we can't allow it to escalate further. And that could be the end of Bibi Netanyahu, because he will be exposed as the fraud, as the liar, as the insecure old man that he is. And hopefully the Israelis will replace him with somebody who will say never again, but not never again the standpoint that Israel is going to become so strong and mighty that they will forever deter violence through fear. Never again, meaning it's time to seek a meaningful peace with the Palestinian people, because that's the only way we emerge from this without more war. A meaningful peace that respects the dignity and the sovereignty of the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, George, you're 100% correct. I mean, this is a conflict that cannot end until one side or the other has been decisively beaten and is willing to make the kind of compromises that they're not willing to make now. And frankly speaking, given the level of suffering that the Palestinian people have undergone over the past 7 decades, they're not likely to be the side that breaks first. Israel is a fundamentally broken nation morally. It's a nation that, regardless of what you think, I know some people take umbrage at this, but I happen to be somebody who believes that Israel has the right to exist, and that we should respect Israel's right to exist, but not in the way that it exists today. You can't exist on the backs of people that you've enslaved, and they have enslaved the Palestinians. In fact, it's worse than slavery, because slaves at least get to have the pretense of working in the fields, pretending for a moment maybe they're free. The Palestinians, especially those in Gaza, are stuck in this open-air prison, not of their own construct. Israel underwent a fundamental change in its demographics and politics in the 1990s when they opened the doors to the former Soviet Union, and hundreds of thousands of Soviet Jews fled to Israel, altering the balance. When I was in Israel in the 1990s, there was a struggle between right and left, but both agreed that there was a necessity for peace. However imperfect their political solutions might have been, I know for a fact that Yitzhak Rabin was looking for a peaceful outcome, looking for a settlement before he was assassinated by a right-wing Israeli. And now Benjamin Netanyahu has stepped into the gap, and ever since then, Israel has been drifting towards an even more radical right-wing solution. As long as Benjamin Netanyahu and his ilk are in power in Israel, there is no hope for peace, none whatsoever. And you are right. Israel will go into Gaza with a vengeance, and hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinians will lose their lives. And in the end, some morally conscious nation, and I say that with the greatest, I don't believe it. There's no such thing as a morally conscious nation that keeps their tongue silent now. But some nation, the United States perhaps, will say enough is enough. Even we can't stomach the slaughter that you have perpetrated, and it's time to bring this fighting to a halt, and the cycle will begin all over again until the next time. Now, the only hope for this outcome not to go that way is if Hezbollah gets involved in a major way and breaks the paradigm. And if Hezbollah is backed by Syria and Syria is backed by Iran, and then we will see the strategic defeat of Israel. We may see the end of Benjamin Netanyahu physically or politically, and whatever replaces him in Israel will be somebody who is compelled by this defeat to seek peace in a way that's equitable for the Palestinian people. But until which time Israel is strategically defeated, there's no hope for peace, none whatsoever, because Israel, as it currently exists, can't have peace, because peace requires them to treat the Palestinian people with respect, with dignity. And Israel today is incapable of treating the Palestinian people with the respect and dignity, not only that they deserve, but that they demand. What happened yesterday, as violent and ugly as it was a manifestation of the demand that the Palestinians be treated seriously, with respect. I, like everybody else, I think shudders at the death and destruction that took place. I wish it had never happened.